As an ESL teacher, there will be times when it is necessary for you to prepare some content with the purpose of teaching new vocabulary to your students. When you are doing this, it's very important to provide them with good input, and that means varied input. You may have noticed that your ESL students struggle with using the correct tense on their verbs, especially their irregular verbs. You may also see that they struggle to put sentences together, and one of the main reasons for this is just because they need more language input. Good input is good output. They need varied input. If you were to watch a television show or listen to the radio and listen very carefully for sentence patterns that are unique, people putting words in an order that you've never heard before, you would probably notice that people very rarely are speaking or organizing their thoughts using sentence patterns that you've never heard before or that they've never heard before. What that means is that they're copying. They're copying sentences that they've heard before. And your students are in the same situation. It's just one of the ways that language works. Language is very pattern oriented. The way that we process language and produce language is very pattern oriented. So as a result, your students need a lot of variance in examples. They need lots of different language patterns given to them so that they have different ways of expressing a word that you're giving them. In addition to giving lots of variance on your language patterns, it's also good to use lots of variance on your tenses as well. Show your students past tense, present tense, future tense, and progressive tenses as well. So those four tense categories. Let's say my word of the day is bring. My first example is, I have no legs. My mom will bring food to me. Notice that this is two sentences, not one. Quite often, an ESL teacher will ask their students to make one sentence that has a word in it. And when you ask like that, you're giving your students a limitation. You're giving them a goal, which is to use the word correctly, but you're giving them a limitation with that goal at the same time. You're telling them to do it in one sentence. It's not easy to do that. It's much easier if you let them know that it's fine if they use two or more sentences in the process of demonstrating the proper usage of a word. So to help my students know that it's okay to do it this way, I show them it's okay to do it this way. I will use multiple sentences for each example. It's a really good practice to adopt. It's really going to help your students to be able to produce language in the classroom without struggling quite so much. So that's two sentences. I have no legs. My mom will bring food to me. Notice that one of the characteristics of language is that you are expressing complete thoughts, you're expressing context, you're telling a story. My mom will bring food to me is not a very interesting or engaging sentence. And There's no reason for it. Why would my mom bring food to me? Well, if there's no reason for that sentence to exist on its own, then it's almost impossible for me to think of that sentence just because somebody told me to use the word bring in a sentence. I will struggle. I need to think of a story in my mind first, and then I express that situation or that story as several sentences together. I have no legs. My mom will bring food to me. Now there's a reason for that second sentence to exist, and it's so much easier for me to use the word bring because I thought of a story first. And that's one of the strategies I try to encourage my students to use, is to think of a situation first. Think of a story first. And if necessary, process the language of that thought in your native language first and then say it in English. And if you're unable to do that, then you can ask the co-teacher for help, and the co-teacher can tell you how to express yourself in English. Let's go to the next example now. My mom wants me to bring a gift to my neighbor. I wonder what is in the box. Again, we're using two sentences, and the second sentence doesn't really provide any value, but it does kind of tell a story, and that helps it to stay a little bit interesting, a little bit engaging. And it's important to remember that you're not just modeling how to put a word into a sentence. You're modeling the usage of language. You're modeling how to use language to express ideas. So feel free, and let your students feel free, to think of a story, think of a situation, and then just express that situation. Don't make your students feel like they have to stop immediately after they have satisfied the requirement of using the word that you've asked them to use. So this example is a model of that. My mom wants me to bring a gift to my neighbor. Why? Well, I didn't say why, but I can say, how do I feel? I wonder what is in the box. Ooh, interesting. I want to make an apple pie, but I need 3 apples. Can you bring some apples to my home? When I'm putting my sentences together, I try to keep the language level appropriate for what my students will be comfortable with. But occasionally I will add a new word that maybe they haven't heard, like the word wonder. I wonder what is in the box. My students might not know the word wonder, and I'm not going to give them a definition of that word because that interrupts the flow of my class. So in order to prioritize flow and not have big disruptions in our thought processes, if somebody asked me, what does wonder mean? I would ask my co-teacher to give a direct translation of that word in the native language. So she would say wonder in Chinese. It only takes 2 seconds, and class continues. My dad does not like to stand up and get things. He will ask me to bring things to him. He will ask me to. Here I am modeling a sentence pattern that it isn't necessary for me to model this, but it's a simple sentence pattern, and just by being exposed to the language my students are going to be learning. So I'm always thinking about adding in extra little sentence patterns throughout my lesson. Another thing that I try to be mindful about is having parts of my lesson tie in with things that have been taught earlier in the same lesson or in a recent lesson. For example, the work that I'm working on right now talks about the difference between build and make. You do not build an apple pie. You make an apple pie and you build a house. Since I'm thinking about having an apple pie, I decided I would use the word make. So I'm reinforcing a word and I'm putting it in context. I'm reinforcing something that was earlier in the lesson. That makes your lesson very dense so that your students will not only have better memory recall because of all that repetition, but they're going to be learning more quickly as well. My dad, I already did that one. Okay, always bring paper and pencils to school. That is a sentence which is relevant to my students, is probably something that they've heard or thought about in their own language. However, this sentence is also going to establish a bit of context for the following sentences. I'm going to begin telling a bit of a story. When you're telling a story, you have context. When you have context, students can look at the location of a new word and see how that word fits in with the other words around it, and they will be able to understand the meaning of that word, even if they don't know it. I brought my pencils to school, past tense, but I forgot to bring paper. Now my teacher is angry. Oh, my teacher is angry. That's interesting. If your content is interesting, then it's going to be easier for your students to remain focused and engaged, so they'll learn better. I am bringing a pencil to you so that our teacher won't be angry. Aren't you happy that I brought extra pencils to school? I am smart. I always bring extra pencils. So here I'm using a little bit of light humor, but we also have bring, bringing, brought. I am using different tenses of this word, and that's something that's especially important to do for irregular verbs. Because they're irregular, your students need to get lots of experience seeing that verb in the past tense form, so that when they are thinking of a sentence that uses that verb, they will use the right form of it.